Greetings, my fellow freedom lovers, sovereign thinkers, LLP's News Podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy Memphis, South Florida. And today's date is Thursday, January 10th, 2019. So let us begin. Oh, thanks folks for tuning in. Yeah, it's a little bit noisy here. I'm at Collective Evolution in the heart of downtown Fort Lauderdale. And it's cool place, good vibe. Just hit the website, cafecollective.com. Look up Fort Lauderdale. And the good vibe, so like I said, it's pretty cool. They do have open mic nights and storytelling and networking after work. Pretty cool little place. Yeah, so I know everyone be talking about the wall and the shutdown and all that good stuff. And what President Trump assumes he can all do it himself. Of course, he got the other district of criminal representatives saying he's not this, he's doing everything illegal. But if they do it, it's okay. It's called exceptionalism, right? So one thing you have to always gotta observe, my friends, is just it's nothing more than a political power game. That's how I see it. And we know too is that is the ball make a unilateral decision, national emergency, unconstitutional? We'll find out. So I'm going to talk about that. And there was a bill on the floor to repeal the red flag law in Florida, which is very good because I do see a due process issue and seizure. And it comes to government. You can't be lovey-dovey. So we're going to address that as well. And some good news happened with 5 men are serving time for human trafficking along the U.S.-Mexico border. And what was interesting about that, because even the Mexican and American authorities did join ventures to get this through, because when it comes to human trafficking, prostitution, and all that, no one likes it, period, including governmental delegates on a human perspective. So that is good news, and those areas I do admire, and there's a lot of work still needs to be done. So, without further ado, do a little commentary work here, and this one here, Lou Rockwell, came out earlier this morning. Can the president alone build a border wall? It is by Andrew P. Napolitano, the judge to be exact. As it reads here, when Donald Trump was looking for a catchy phrase during his 2016 presidential campaign to address the issue of immigrants entering the United States unlawfully, a line that would resonate with his supporters, he came up with the phrase, build the wall. Of course, everyone climaxed and go, yes, master, we have another, build the wall. The reference, of course, is to what Trump advertised would be a 30-foot tall, 1,000-mile-long Mexico-financed physical wall along our border with Mexico. At first, most folks seem to dismiss this pie in the sky. Why would the government of a foreign country pay for a wall in the United States built so as to keep its own citizens and residents from entering the United States? The answer, I wouldn't. But President Trump changed his argument that Mexico would pay directly for his wall by arguing instead that the $5.7 billion down payment he wants on a $25 billion to $30 billion project would indirectly pay for itself and reduce government welfare and law enforcement expenses. The idea of the wall never took hold during the first 2 years of his presidency when the Republican controlled both houses of Congress. Even Republicans were leery of the cost and the imagery. The federal government is running about a $1 trillion a year in the red, and Republicans are looking to offer comfort in their party to Hispanics, adding to that debt to build a wall that would affront on other Hispanics did not rest well with them until now. Now that the Democrats control the House of Representatives, where the idea of a wall is dead on arrival, it's easier for the House Republicans to argue in favor of it, because Democrats numerically outnumber them. The House Republicans won't be forced to vote on it. The president's probably kicking himself for not calling in a few favors and addressing the wall before the Democrats took control of the House. So faced with intractable opposition in the House and only lukewarm, mainly symbolic support in the Senate, Trump has threatened to bypass Congress, declare a national state of emergency, and build a wall on his own. Can he legally do this? In a word, no. Here is the backstory. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Everyone who works in government take a public oath of fidelity to the Constitution. That means to its very words and to the values that those words represent. All federal powers come from the Constitution and from not other source. The state formed the federal government and limited its powers when they ratified the Constitution. They are the basic truisms of American government, yet have veered so far from them what they bear repeating. Now back to the president's wall. President Trump has no power to build a wall or a fence or a doghouse on private property without an express or implied congressional authorization to do so. The vast majority of the property in Texas on which he wants to build is private, according to Representative Will Hurd, Republican from Texas, whose district contains longer stretch of the border than anyone else's. Thus, the federal government must use eminent domain, which gives each landowner the right to a trial to challenge the government as what worth of the property the government wants. Representative Hurd, a former CIA agent and conservative Republican who opposes the wall, has articulated the views of most of his 800,000 constituents. Not in my backyard. We know from the plan wording of the Constitution and from history that all expenditures of money from the federal treasury and all federal use of property must be first approved by Congress. In 1952, the Supreme Court ruled on this when President Harry Truman seized American steel mills during the labor strike and directed the Secretary of Commerce to hire folks to operate the mills. Pursuant to his own emergency declaration that steel was vital to the war effort in Korea, which is an illegal war, of course. The court held that only Congress could authorize a seizure or adverse government occupancy of private property and expenditure of money needed to operate the mills. Then in 1976, Congress provided a definition, which shortly thereafter the courts refined of a national emergency, the existence of events truly beyond the ordinary, wherein there is a palpable and immediate threat to lives, safety, or property that cannot be addressed by the employment of ordinary government assets or the exercise of ordinary governmental powers. That is hardly the case today with the former Central American caravan in Mexico now settled in and housed by the Mexican government away from the border. Nevertheless, the 1976 law requires that all ordinary assets are present prefers the military be determined unless before a lawful emergency can come up into effect. The military uses this in an emergency, and this is such an emergency. Why did the president wait until it abated before addressing it? Perhaps the answer is that his frustration with the Democratic House has reached a boiling point, but that boiling point cannot be a basis for a declaration of a national emergency. A valid emergency declaration streamlines the government to address the emergency, but it cannot authorize anything that the Constitution prohibits, nor it can authorize the president to avoid anything that the Constitution requires. The president has sworn not only fidelity to the Constitution, but also to take care that federal laws be enforced. If he could disregard that oath, if he could ignore those laws, if he could spend money not authorized by Congress, if he could occupy private property not subject to eminent domain against the will of the owners, in short, if he could make the laws as well as enforce them, then he would not be a president. He'd be a monarch. Interesting commentary there by Judge Andrew Napolitano. And when you look at it, it does have some merit behind it. And of course, even past his predecessors did the same thing on the specific avenues, trying to do things my way or the highway. The world revolves around them. So you have to look at this. Even if you're a Trump worshiper or Trump supporter or not, everyone's going to hold their oath. This little pansy, pretentious partisan blame game is nothing more than hot air, a major distraction. How come we're giving foreign aid to other countries? including Jordan, they already built a wall for that, and with the U.S. funding. And for many of the people, Democrats voted for it. So there's a lot of double speak. Folks can look it up too when you want. Please, I recommend that. The wall's never been an issue. Like I said before, Monroe Doctrine and the drug war, foreign entanglements, United States got to get out of foreign government's affairs. Those are areas we have to really seek. That's why I'm one of those individuals that believe in a republic, not an empire. That's why you always got to look at those areas and study the past, because it's today's greatest teacher. So that's how I observe. And this is what Mr. Rutherford, John Whitehead, from the Rutherford Institute has to say about this. Beware the emergency state, Imperial, Unaccountable, and Unconstitutional. Came out yesterday, by the way, and this is, you can get this on, what's this thing called, Activist Post. Very good site. I recommend it. For 7 decades, we have been wielding our most basic liberties to a secretive, unaccountable emergency state. A vast but increasingly mysterious complex of national security institutions, reflexes, and beliefs that so define our present world that we forget there was a different America. Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness have given away to permanent crisis management, to policing the planet and fighting preventive wars of ideological containment, usually on terrain chosen by and favorable to our enemies. Limited government and constitutional accountability have been shouldered aside by the kind of imperial presidency our constitutional system was explicitly designed to prevent. This is by David C. Unger, The Emergency State, America's Pursuit of Absolute Security at All Costs. It's all happening according to schedule. Civil unrest, the national emergencies, unforeseen economic collapse, loss of functioning political and legal order, purposeful domestic resistance or insurgency, pervasive public health emergencies, and catastrophic natural and human disasters. The government's reliance on the armed forces to solve domestic, political, and social problems, the implicit declaration of martial law package as a well-meaning and overriding concern for the nation's security. The government has been planning and preparing for such a crisis for years now, no matter that this crisis is of the government's own making. To those for whom power and profit are everything, the end always justify the means. The latest brouhaha over President Trump's threat to declare a national emergency in order to build a border wall is more manufactured political theater, a Trojan horse intended to camouflage a real threat to our freedoms, yet another expansion of presidential power exposing us to constitutional peril. It is not about illegal immigration or porous borders or who will pay to build that wall. This is an unadulterated power and the rise of an emergency state that justifies all matters of government tyranny in the so-called name of national security. The seeds of this present madness were sown more than a decade ago when George W. Bush stealthily issued 2 presidential directives that granted the president the power to unilaterally declare a national emergency, which is loosely as defined as any incident, regardless of location, that results in extraordinary levels of mass casualties, damage, or disruption, or severely affecting the U.S. population, infrastructure, environment, economy, or government functions. Comprising the country's community of government, or COG, plan these directives: National Security Presidential Directive 51 and Homeland Security Presidential Directive 20, which do not need congressional approval, provide a skeptical outline of the actions the president will take in the event of a national emergency. Mind you, that national emergency can take any form, can be manipulated for any purpose, and can be used to justify any end goal, all on the say-so of the president. This is exactly the kind of mischief that Thomas Jefferson warned against when he cautioned, "In questions of power, then let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down for mischief by the chains of the Constitution. Power corrupts. Absolute power. Power corrupts absolutely." Thus far, we have at least pretended that the government abides by the Constitution, despite the many attempts by government leaders to claim broader powers for themselves. During wartime, the Constitution allows only one emergency power. The privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless, in the cases of rebellion or an invasion, the public safety may require it. That's Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2. Those who wrote the Constitution sought to ensure our freedom by creating a document that protects our God-given rights at all times, even when we are engaged in war, whenever this is a so-called war on terrorism, a so-called war on drugs, and a so-called war on illegal immigration. This threat by Trump to rule by fiat merely plays into the hands of those who would distort the government system of checks and balances and its constitutional separation of powers beyond all recognition. Apart from the fact that this highly politicized, shamelessly contrived border crisis does not in any way constitute a national emergency to allow such a manufactured emergency to override constitutional constraints, and the rule of law will push the nation that much closer to outright totalitarianism. To be clear, this is not a criticism of Trump or a disavowal of the need for better vigilance at the nation's border. Rather, this is a word of warning. Remember, these powers do not expire at the end of the president's term. They remain on the books, just waiting to be used or abused by the next political demagogue. So, too, every action taken by the Trump administration to weaken the system of checks and balances, sidestep the rule of law, and expand the power of the president makes us that much more vulnerable to those who abuse those powers in the future. No matter whether you consider Trump to be a demagogue or a diehard patriot, there will come a day when Trump no longer occupies the White House, and then what? We've been down this road before. Although the Constitution invests the president with very specific limited powers in recent years, American presidents Trump, Obama, Bush, Clinton, etc. have claimed the power to completely and almost unilaterally alter the landscape of this country for good or for ill. Should the Trump administration act on its threat to build a border wall using the president's emergency power, it will constitute yet another gross perversion of what the limited power the Constitution affords the executive branch. The power is amazed by such successive presidents through the negligence of Congress and the courts. Powers which add up to a toolbox of terror for an imperial ruler, and power that whoever occupies the Oval Office to as a dictator above the law and beyond any real accountability. As law professor William P. Marshall explains, every extraordinary use of power by one president expands the availability of executive branch power for use by future presidents. Moreover, it doesn't matter whether other presidents have chosen not to take advantage of any particular power, because it is the president's action in using power rather than forsaking its use that has to be presidential significance. In other words, such successive president continues to add to his office list of extraordinary orders and directives, expanding the reach and power of the presidency and granting him or herself near dictatorial powers. The abuse of presidential powers has been going on for so long it has become the norm. The Constitution be damned. We no longer have a system of checks and balances. The system of checks and balances that the framers envisioned now lacks effective checks and is no longer in balance, concludes Marshall. The implications of this are serious. The framers designed a system of separation of powers to combat government access and abuse and to curb incompetence. They also believe that in the absence of an effective separation of power structures, such ills would inevitably follow. Unfortunately, however, power once taken is not easily surrendered. all the imperial power amassed by Barack Obama and George W. Bush to kill American citizens without due process, to detain suspects indefinitely, to strip Americans of their citizenship rights, to carry out mass surveillance on Americans without probable cause, to suspend laws during wartime, to disregard laws with which he might disagree, to conduct secret wars and convene secret courts, to sanction torture, to sidestep the legislators and courts with executive orders and signing statements, to direct the military to operate beyond the reach of the law, to operate a shadow government, and to act as a dictator and a tyrant above the law and beyond any real accountability, had become a permanent part of the president's toolbox of terror. These presidential powers acquire the use of executive orders, decrees, memorandums, proclamations, national security directives, and legislative signing statements, and which can be activated by any sitting president, enabled past, present, and future presidents to operate above the law and beyond the reach of the Constitution. America, meet your new dictator-in-chief, Imperial, accountable, and unconstitutional. If we continue down this road, there could be no surprise about what awaits us at the end. After all, it is a tale that has been told time and time again throughout history. For example, 80 years ago, the citizens of another democratic world power elected a leader who promised to protect them from all dangers. In return for his protection under a use by fighting terrorism, he was given absolute power. This leader went to great lengths to make his rise to power appear to both legal and necessary, masterfully manipulating much of the citizenry and their government leaders. Unnerved by threats of domestic terrorism and foreign invaders, the people had a little idea of the domestic turmoil of the times, such as streets rioting and the fear of Kennedy taking over the country, was staged by the leader in an effort to create fear and later capitalize on it. In the ensuing months, this charismatic leader ushered in a series of legislative measures that suspend civil liberties and habeas corpus rights, empowered him as a dictator. On March 23, 1923, the nation's legislative body passed the Enabling Act, formerly referred as to the law to remedy to distress of the people and the nation, which appeared benign and allowed the leader to pass laws by decree in times of emergency. What it succeeded in doing, however, was ensuring that the leader became a law unto himself. The leader name was Adolf Hitler. The rest, as they say, is history. Yet history has its way of repeating itself. Hitler's rise to power should serve as a stark lesson to always be leery of granting any government leader sweeping powers. Clearly, we are not heeding that lesson. Indeed, all those dastardly seeds we have allowed the government to sow under the guise of the national security are bearing demon fruit. Brace yourself. There is something being concocted in the dens of power, far beyond the public eye, and it doesn't bode well for the future of this country. Anytime you have an entire nation so memorized by antics of the political ruling class that they are obvious to all else, you'd better beware. Anytime you have a government that operates in the shadows, speaks in a language of force, and rules by fiat, you better beware. And anytime you have a government so far removed from its people as to ensure that they are never seen, heard, or heeded by the elected who represent them, you better beware. And I make this clear in my book, Battlefield America, the war on the American people. We are at our most vulnerable now. The gravest threat facing us as a nation is not extremism or despotism, exercised by the ruling class, whose only allegiance is to power and money. Absolutely. So everyone out there, like I said before, I don't care if you're a Trump worshiper, supporter, or not. You better pay attention. It has happened so many times. Look at the executive orders Franklin Delano Roosevelt did. very fantastic example. And so did Abraham Lincoln during the so-called Civil War. I can say that too. There was an illegal war. Things like this happened before. Don't get mesmerized by some president as a Lord and Savior. He's supposed to be an elected ambassador by the states. Period. Article 2 of our U.S. Constitution. Nothing more. The key to vigilance, actually, the key to liberty is eternal vigilance, and nullification is the remedy. Thomas Jefferson. And when you examine things like this, my friends, just study the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Even in South Florida, Broward County to be exact, they had a Broward resolution that nullified certain language pertaining to both USA Patriot and National Security and Domestic Security Acts. Read that too, because that's still in the books, and that can be done. If every state in the union and local government does this, this whole emergency act is null and void. It's done. And plus, you always got to be aware of your police departments and sheriff's departments. They are funded by the feds, a la Homeland Security. Many sheriffs are members of that organization, which is unconstitutional and contradicts their oath of office, a la Scott Israel from Broward County, Joe Lombardo from Las Vegas, and so on. Remember, if you want to fight nationals, if you want to prevent or fight the real war on terror, resisting tyranny, you have to protect the Bill of Rights, our U.S. Bill of Rights culture. No exceptions. And I will say that's enough. Next one here came from the Florida 10th Amendment Action Center. And this one came from Representative Mike Hill, HB 175. Says here, firearms, remove provisions authorizing seizure of firearms from persons in certain circumstances, remove prohibition of firearms ownership or possession to removal of firearms possession and firearms ownership disability. Remove prohibition persons younger than 21 years of age of purchasing firearms. Eliminate a waiting period for such firearms other than handguns. Remove bans on bump fire stocks. Believe it or not, I'll just stop right there because the 21 and over age is unconstitutional anyway because it didn't go through the constitutional proceedings amendments on Article 12 of our state constitution. So all those dinkleberries, okay, that vote for are not more than a bunch of Yahoo illiterates. I think you're so damn stupid. I will continue on here. Remove provisions providing for the risk protection orders effective date upon becoming law. Last event filed on Monday, January 7th, 2019 at 1:20 p.m. And as it reads here, Representative Mike Hill files red flag and gun control repeal bill in Florida House, but there is no Senate bill. The bill aims at the SB 7026, Stoneman Public Safety Act provisions, infringing on firearm purchases and allowing confiscation. What can be done to get a Senate bill version? Mike Hill has filed HB 175 in the House. This bill would appeal the age restrictions for firearms purchases in Florida and return the legal age to Florida's majority age of 18 for long gun purchases. 3-day waiting period would only apply to handguns and not for CCW holders, essentially restoring Florida gun laws and what they were prior to passage of SB 726. The bill will also appeal Florida's bump stock ban. Another victimless crime law, right? Yeah, exactly. No victim, no crime. Who's the injured party? Oh, there's none here. In addition, the bill repeals the emergency risk order protection language of SB 726, also known as the red flag law. Red flag laws reverse innocent until proven guilty due process. Gun owners can have their private property confiscated by police if a threat of violence by the gun owner against someone or themselves is reported to police. ERPO laws are favored by Donald Trump and Florida's now senior federal senator Marco Rubio has filed a bill to allow federal funds to be directed towards states to implement ERPO. Yes, 10th Amendment is more of an encroachment of Federalist Papers 46. Glamboy Rubio does again. Of course, Donald Trump chose poorly. Once again, all you guys, Trump train, rah, rah, rah. All right, Hill's bill is being heralded by gun rights groups, although no press release or comment regarding this bill has been released by Mary Hammer of Florida's NRA chapter. Why? Because you're bending over for Donald Trump and Marco Rubio? You got to always be careful with these lobbyist groups, okay? And that's why I'm very disappointed with the National Rifle Association. You got some good people there, but you got these clowns as well. So, folks, you got to start doing it yourselves. HB 175 faces an uphill battle. There's no similar bill filed in the Florida Senate. Politically, Florida is a purple state trending blue. This fact is not lost on Republicans who barely won the governor's race and have no less than a dozen Florida legislators' seats that will be played in 2020. Repealing their own signature public safety item they authored in the wake of the Parkland shootings isn't likely. In the Senate vote on SB 726, only George Gaynor, Tom Lee, and Dennis Baxley remain of the Republicans' no votes. Among other Republicans' no votes, Greg Zubel has moved on to the federal House. Denise Grimsley termed out, and Dorothy Holke passed away. The Florida House Republicans were also overwhelming in support for SB 726. Citizen supporters of HB 75 should contact their own Florida state senators and urge them to sponsor a Senate version. And it's absolutely correct. I do support this, and because it was unconstitutional because it violates Article 1, Section 2(9) of the Florida Constitution. And we could call this an ex facto law under Article 10, Section 10 of the same article. And it's a fact because it's considered a prohibited law. So I urge everyone in Florida to support this. I'm gonna send my 2 cents in to Chip LaMarca and ask him, hey, you better start really looking at the bigger picture, man. If you support confiscation, then you should have an I love Fidel Castro or Benito Mussolini button. All right, let's just let you know. If they don't like it, too bad. Get out. Go contaminate space somewhere else. That's why you gotta talk to these people at times. Something can be polite, that's one thing, but be firm. Don't be afraid of these people. They need us more than we need them. That's how I look at it. So I say, support it. Petition. Get this thing going. All right. This is some good news here. It came out yesterday from the Freedom Outpost. It says here, DOJ, 5 Mexican nationals sentenced in international sex trafficking ring. It is by Tim Brown. Came out yesterday. On Monday, the Department of Justice informed the public that 5 members of the Mexican sex trafficking organizations were sentenced to prison. By the way, American taxpayers would be paying to feed, clothe, and house these men for the duration of their incarceration. In April 2017, 8 members of the international criminal organization known as the rendon-reyes trafficking organization entered guilty pleas for racketeering, sex trafficking, and other federal charges following their arrest in Mexico in federal district court in Brooklyn, New York, according to the Justice Department. Last week in federal court, district court in Brooklyn, New York, 5 members of the notorious international criminal organization known as the rendon-reyes trafficking organization were sentenced to prison terms of 15 to 25 years by a United States District Court Judge Edward R. Corman. The amount to be paid in restitution will be announced at a later date. 3 other defendants are set to be sentenced on January 15th. Defendants previously plead guilty to racketeering, sex trafficking, and other federal charges following their arrest in Mexico and the United States where they were residing illegally. Over a decade, the rendon-reyes trafficking organization based in Tanacazingo, Tlaxcala, Mexico, smuggled numerous young women and girls from Mexico and Central America into the United States and forced them to engage in prostitution for organizations' profit, generating hundreds of thousands of dollars in criminal proceeds that were laundered back to Mexico. The U.S. Attorney's Office for Eastern District of New York and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division prosecuted this case. The sentences were as follows. Jovan Rendon-Reyes, a.k.a. Giovanni, 32 of Mexico, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Saul Rendon-Reyes, a.k.a. Santanico, 41 of Mexico, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Felix Rojas, 48 of Mexico, was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Odalyn Martinez Rojas, a.k.a. Chino or Saul, 47 of Mexico, was sentenced to over 24 years in prison. Severino Martinez Rojas, 53 of Mexico, was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Additionally, Severino Martinez Rojas was also sentenced in a related case in the Northern District of Georgia. Those proceedings were transferred to the Eastern District of New York for the entry of the defendant's guilty plea last year. The case were consolidated for last week's sentencing. Defendants Jose Rendon Garcia, a.k.a. Gosano, 35 of Mexico, Guillermina Rendon-Reyes, 48 of Mexico, and Francisco Rendon-Reyes, a.k.a. Pancho, 30 of Mexico, will be sentenced on January 15th. These well-deserved sentences reflect the gravity of the human trafficking crimes these defendants committed, as said Acting Attorney General Whitaker. The defendants operated an extensive sex trafficking enterprise that preyed on vulnerable young women and girls, deceiving them with false promises, coercing their compliance, and compelling them into submission through beatings, threats, isolation, and intimidation. This prosecution is the result of strong partnerships among the Eastern District of New York, the Civil Rights Division Human Trafficking Prosecution Unit, the New York Office of the Department of Homeland Security Investigations, and our Mexican law enforcement counterparts. The sentences imposed in this case demonstrated our unwavering commitment to work across the international borders to dismantle traditional trafficking networks and seek justice on behalf of the victims and survivors. These sentencings are the latest chapter in the office's long-term commitment to eradicate human trafficking in all forms of the modern-day slavery. Stated United States Attorney Donahue. The crimes committed by the members of the Rendon-Reyes trafficking organization were brutal and shocking, and I hope that the sentences give the victims, in this case, some sense of justice. We will not tolerate the exploitation of women and girls for profit or sexual servitude. These individuals now face consequences of the callous criminal actions exploiting women and girls whom they forced into sex slavery for profit, and said Homeland Security Investigations. Executive Associated Director Derek Benner. The investigation and prosecution that led to today's sentencing to speak to the strong bilateral relationship between the United States and Mexico, in which both nations are committed to hold accountable those engaging in the ruthless act of human trafficking. Investigating human trafficking remains a priority for HSI, whose primary focus is to reduce victims and release them from the grip of their captors. HSI will continue leveraging of all of its investigative capabilities to disrupt human trafficking syndicates, no matter where in the world they operate. The DOJ added details of the decade-long criminal activity. According to documents filed in court between December 2004 and 2015, members of the Rendon-Reyes organization, including defendants, enriched themselves by forcing multiple young women and girls, including the 12 referenced in court documents, to perform countless commercial sex acts through the United States and Mexico. The organization targeted vulnerable women and girls, some as young as 14, from impoverished areas of Mexico and Central America. Male members of the organization typically use false promises of love and marriage to lure the victims into fraudulent romantic relationships. In some instances, they forcibly abducted the victims, and on one occasion, a victim's child. The members of the organization frequently arranged for others to smuggle the victims across the border into the United States. Once in the United States, the members of the organization utilized different methods to force the victims to engage in prostitution, including severe and repeated beatings, sexual assaults, forced abortions, threats to the victims, their families, and children, and psychological harm. The members of the organization forced the victim to perform many as 45 sex acts a night and took all the prostitution proceeds, funneling the money back to Mexico. The investigation, prosecution, bilateral enforcement action, and extradition of the defendants apprehended in Mexico were coordinated through the U.S.-Mexico Bilateral Human Trafficking Enforcement Initiative. Since 2009, the Department of Justice and Homeland Security have collaborated with Mexican law enforcement counterparts in a bilateral human trafficking enforcement initiative to more effectively dismantle human trafficking networks operating across the U.S.-Mexico border, bring human traffickers to justice, restore the rights of the dignity of the human trafficking victims. These efforts have resulted in successful prosecutions in both Mexico and the United States, including U.S. federal prosecutions of over 170 defendants in multiple cases in New York, Georgia, Florida, and Texas. In addition, numerous Mexican federal and state prosecutions of associates of traffickers. The convictions in this case are also the latest development in the Eastern District of New York Comprehensive Anti-Trafficking Program, which has the date indicted more than 80 defendants, assisted more than 150 victims, including 4 or 5 minors, reunited 19 victims, children with their mothers, and secured restitution orders of over $4 million on behalf of the trafficking victims. On a human element, I am very pleased. Like I said before, when it comes to, you're always going to have good folks in these institutions. See, something like this I will commend, because human trafficking is unacceptable regardless where you're from and what your belief system is. We're all human beings here. We're not numbers. We have beautiful natural born rights, great gifts. It shouldn't be deprived or disparaged. And I'm just curious if these men will ever survive in these prison facilities. You never know. And you know what? If something happens to them, I can tell you this. Don't be surprised if the guards could care less. They go, the guy's a piece of trash anyway. And there's folks in there right now, they have families. They know the game, regardless what the ethnic background is. So I am pleased to see this. So that's the good element on life and what they're trying to do. And that's why I did praise Donald Trump for signing an executive order on that, to be more aggressive. This is why I look at all sides. If they, like I said before, if they're in the right, I'm going to commend it. If they're in the wrong, I'm going to criticize it. That's how I see it. If you show true animosity or worship one person that can't do any wrong, then you'll be fooling yourselves. Always keep them on their toes and commend them when they do right. And that is it. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, or if you sent something that's interesting you may want to check out, whatever you do, please send your correspondences with decorum. And you can hit me in all the social media sites and email addresses, which I'll be posting on my Facebook page. No, not Facebook page. Spreaker page. All right, my friends. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love. And may your guardian spirits be with you.